It's just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Queer Film Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and with me this week are Max and Matthew. Hey boys.
Hello.
Hello.
It's so nice to have you back, Matt. I feel like it's been a while since you've been on, so it's nice to have you back around. And I know this is one that you've wanted to talk about for a while because I know you have a crush on Bob Hoskins. And after actually watching Super Mario Brothers tonight, I see it more now than I did with just Roger Rabbit. But that's me.
Fair. Is it the mustache?
It's the mustache, and also I grew up watching Roger Rabbit, and I didn't grow up watching this. I saw this. We'll get into it.
1993 Bob Hoskins has like a lot of swagger in this.
Yeah,
he's got like 3 girlfriends. He's got Big Bertha.
Oh, so Max, this is going to be totally useless for the sake of an audio only format. But I was just telling Brian, I have this whole deck of novelty trading cards that commemorate scenes from the movie. I have this one, Shall We Dance? Bob Hoskins and his brilliant dance with Bertha, who, you know, as far as I'm sure we're going to dive into the whole philosophy of adaptation here, Bertha was like not a woman in the games, right? She's like a fish. Isn't that the
yeah?
Big Bertha's a big fish, and then I think it's also a combo of Bertha. What was her name from Super Mario Brothers 2? The one that spat out eggs.
Birdo?
Oh, I don't know.
Birdo, that's right.
The canonically trans Mario character.
Yeah.
Oh, that's I didn't know about this. We'll have to go into that when we get into the movie. So we're here talking about the Super Mario Brothers movies. It's inevitable at this point in 2023 to talk about the 1993 version, which was going to be our main focus. But Matthew and I have both seen the most recent one, the new one, starring Chris Pratt and Charlie Day. It's probably the biggest movie in the world as of when we're recording this. I didn't like it. As I said in my Letterboxd review, it's the cinematic equivalent of watching someone else play video games.
But even that could be fun. I mean, you and I just saw John Wick, Brian, and I felt like feels like cut scenes and someone else playing a video game, but like that one, is it because it's hyperactive? Is it because it's just like, who's the studio that does this new Super Mario Bros. Movie? Okay, that makes sense. So they know how to make a lot of money, but they don't necessarily maybe know how to make something of much quality.
Yeah. It's weird. I mean, like, yeah, your mileage will vary depending, I think, on how excited you get by, you know, a thing showing up in the movie and being like, oh my God, I remember that thing from video game. And for me, that was a really big portion of my enjoyment of the movie. Like anything that you can possibly think of that is associated with or has been associated with the Mario IP is in that fucking movie.
Yeah.
They really crammed it to the gills, but it is Brian, it is a really bad movie. And for me, the biggest sin is just that it's chock full of that. I think people have been attributing it to Illumination, this Illumination style humor, but it's really just kind of, you know, the whoops, that happened, or Mario, they pick apart the reality factor of everything that shows up as like an index of the video game. So Mario will see some floating blocks and he'll be like, is anybody else seeing these blocks floating in front of me? Or like, you know, Princess Peach will do something cool and somebody goes, wow, now that's how you princess. And it's just really annoying. It's so insipid and annoying, but it's cool to see. Yeah, it's cool to see paratroopers on the big screen. So we love that.
Like I think I agree. That was literally everything I liked about it. It was like recognizing stuff from the video games and that kind of, and you know, it must be said, you said it's packed to the gills. I kind of almost want to commend it because it's literally packed to the gills, like words and names and phrases in the background from like deep cut like Nintendo stuff. He's got like an Excitebike poster on his wall. He's playing the original Nintendo Entertainment System, and like he works at what's the name of the pizza place that he works at?
Is it Spike's? No. Spike is the guy who just harasses him.
Yeah. There's just a bunch of like, I can't even remember them now. I'm sure could look them up. But
Well, and Charles Martinet also shows up for to do his classic little woohoo, as the side character who does the little Mario jump. It's cute. There's a
and
lot
like the
of
logo on the logo on the van is like the logo of the original game. Like,
right.
That's the only thing it gets right, which is fitting because it feels like it's its only reason for existing. We're just going to throw all of it up there.
I don't want to come down too hard on the movie because I wouldn't say that the movie in itself is camp, but there is a lot of camp excellence coming from Anya Taylor-Joy in her role as Princess Peach. She just says all of the lines that she says with this kind of like A24 like gravity, which is just really, really funny. And the one that has been just like pinging around my the inside of my skull for the past couple of days, and I have gotten the opportunity to annoy all of my friends that I've seen the movie with by repeating this over and over, is when she finally gives in and to save, to prevent the Mushroom Kingdom from being destroyed. Spoilers, she agrees to marry Bowser, and she says, "Okay, fine, I'll marry you. Just don't hurt my toads." It's so fucking funny. It's so great. That was a genius casting choice. It doesn't work at all, but it's very, very funny.
Yeah, her whole character, and I actually saw a comment online that kind of blew my mind because somebody was like, "Oh, I love how they did Princess Peach. Like, she's such a strong woman and like whatever." Like, but she's not. She is established as fully capable of going and confronting Bowser. She's mastered that little test that it takes Mario an entire montage to figure out. And then she shows Mario how to do it, and she's like, "Okay, now you can do it." Like, she just steps aside for literally no reason. And I get it. I mean, the reason is because it's called the Super Mario Brothers movie, and Mario has to be the hero, right? Like, and I get it.
This whole other weird can of worms around the movie's like massive success and how people are interpreting it, because it's kind of like this weird like ink blot test about how you feel about quote unquote wokeness. Like, I'm sure you've seen like people already claiming, "Oh my God, the movie is succeeding because it, because it isn't like a woke movie." And then some people are saying, "Oh my God, they made Princess Peach a girl boss. Like, it is a woke movie." And it's just like the most incomprehensible discourse around a movie that it seems to be this weird little Rorschach test for just what specific kind of online insanity you have.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
I have been a fan of Vulture, the website, for a long time. It's like a sort of a subset of New York Magazine. I've subscribed for a long time. They wrote a pretty honest review, and if you look through the comment section, there's like 100 plus, and they're all from people who signed up the day they posted their comment, all to like leave this comment to the writer. I don't remember who the writer was like, "You obviously shouldn't be a film critic. You have no idea what you're talking about." Like, and these people created this account to attack this critic because she didn't like, or he didn't like, I honestly don't remember, the Super Mario Brothers movie. Like, and then they made it like their whole day.
I mean, this is what I'm afraid of hearing, that there's a discourse about this new Super Mario Brothers movie. It's like, why is there any discourse? I know that it's making a lot of money. Is that why people feel like they have to have a strong opinion on it one way or the other?
I have no idea.
Isn't this just kind of like, oh, they did a Nintendo version of Minions? Like, this is what Illumination's known for. Yeah. But I mean, like, this is my bigger fear of being like, okay, modern film critics have to review everything that's out there, but do they? Like, these type of things should just be like known as content. And so all those people that feel like, oh, you can't say any bad word about it. All right, there you go. There's your baby food. There's everything else. Maybe there shouldn't be. I know we're now spending an episode talking about it, but is this something? Well, the 93 version does, because it's such a notorious flop and everything. But I don't know. It's so weird to also see this around the margins for people getting so riled up about a 40-year-old, video game.
Right. It's just, to me, it's just sort of the laziest sort of filmmaking and script writing, which is it relies entirely on, hey, do you remember this? And there's not really much else to it. And I to add to the discourse, or not to maybe not add to the discourse, I want to say that this episode was inspired by Matthew's Letterboxd review of the 1993 Super Mario Brothers, which I pulled up. And it's very short. So if you don't mind, Matthew, I can read it, or if you'd prefer to read it, they are your words.
You go ahead.
Every day I learn more about my ethnic heritage and my childhood libidinal formation, or Bob Hoskins is very important to me.
Yeah, I mean, that more or less sums it up. That's, yeah.
And I remember, so it's dated July 12th, 21. I must have read it when it was new because it probably showed up in your profile. And I remember that it made me laugh out loud. And I remember being like, okay, now we have to talk about this movie. And I wanted to time it with the release of the animated movie. But Max works for the Chicago Election Board. In case his voice sounds familiar, you might have seen him on the news recently. So congrats for that, Max. But you were very busy, so we had to bump it until after it came out. And now, as part of the discourse, we're discussing the animated movie because Matthew and I both saw it. But the crux, the main point of this episode is the 1993 Super Mario Brothers.
All right, so you've got a very successful Mario Brothers movie up against now one of the first, big notorious video game adaptations that was a gigantic flop.
Yeah.
How does the new version compare to 1993 in your mind? Of being like, did they like wipe everything clean and they're like, are we playing it safe? Like, it sounds like your guys' discussion of all these Easter eggs and just kind of playing towards the fans was the right move for a studio wanting to probably capture finally something that made up Super Mario.
The best,
yeah, for sure.
It's way to put it, right down to the casting. I mean, there was that whole uproar about Chris Pratt being Mario, and then we were all reassured that he wasn't going to be as bad as that concept instantly sounds. And he was like fine. He wasn't good, but
he slips in and out of the Mario voice a few times. Did you notice that? There's a few line readings that just sound like Andy Dwyer.
I mean, and that's the thing, is they kind of made Mario into this. They had to make Mario into a character to begin with, because Mario is not really a character. He's in this grand tradition of
he's a mascot.
Who don't speak, and even less than Link, who has a semblance of personality. Mario just doesn't. He's just kind of like a nowhere man. He is a symbol. But what is so interesting about the juxtaposition of these two movies is, yes, the success levels highly contrasting between the two, but also, going back to that point of it being the new one being safe, like you said, Max, the original, for those who haven't seen it, or just to recap for those who have, is like so far away from what would be recognizable as a Mario Brothers IP. I mean, they wear the signature like overalls and caps and everything. You have your kind of like service characters, like Ron Perlman shows up as Toad at one point, which is incredibly bizarre, and that doesn't go anywhere really. Yoshi's in there, but he's like a realistic like velociraptor. So there are these moments of like fan service, but the whole thing is this very weird, like kind of Blade Runner-y story, like set in this, dingy kind of like dystopian, like steampunkish, upside down world. I don't know. How would you describe it? Brian and Max, you guys had both seen it before, correct?
Yeah, Matt, I was obsessed with this movie when I was like 9 through 11. It was a VHS one that my sister and I revisited quite a few times. We had loved the Nintendo game, but there was just this kind of queer, bizarre, like car crash type of energy to this movie. But then we pretty much gave it up. Like, it was not something that we like kept watching, a cult item that traveled with us to adulthood, like maybe Clue was, or Little Shop of Horrors, or many other films we were watching around that time. So this one lived in a memory for so long for me because I remembered most details, or misremembered some details too, until I finally just tracked down a DVD copy. Like, part of the, I think, hard for the 93 Super Mario Brothers to have a cult at this point is because you can't stream it anywhere, and you can't really kind of find it in pieces. So Brian and I, we just rewatched my old 93 DVD copy that only has captions and scene selection and no features and nothing else, and was just kind of still bad quality. So I feel, this whole thing comes in with almost like this fever dream quality too, of like, did this movie ever actually happen? Even though that in 93, they put a lot of money behind it, or at least, trying to at least make the first big video game adaptation capture something of kids' attention, jam some songs in there from the era too. And I don't know, it is just as big of a mess as it was when I saw it as a kid, but has this continued fascination for me because it is, you have to squint to really see any of your video game elements, even though that this thing has been rewritten and is loud and is garish and is for children. It's set in this dystopian future that is because of its directors who did the Max Headroom TV show, which again took this mascot, took this commercial type of character from Coca-Cola commercials, and then built this television show about it being in this dystopian future where there was this double character. Matt Frewer also played this journalist that was like trying to get to the heart of this big brother, and Max Headroom would help them out. So it was just one of those things where I think they looked at the creative people involved and they said, oh, this might work. And then realizing pretty quickly that this was not going to work for them in any way. And they were going to at least just try to sell the sellable elements. So you have this very weird, often dark, often chaotic movie that then throws in a bomb or throws in like a Hammer Brothers reference if you squint in the back screen. So there are like the Easter eggs and other things there, but have all been very deliberately twisted to be, like a mushroom is this very realistic, ugly fungus rather than something that's like happy and cartoony. It's everything that's just going to probably turn off all of like who would be its audience and the parents that might enjoy it too at the same time. And, lives on as this item, but one that I think stubbornly still resists a cult at this point, even though that there's a lot of people our age that have it kind of firmly stuck in their memory.
It's this weird, and I would like to issue a retraction. I said that Ron Perlman was Toad. He is not. It was Mojo Nixon.
I was going to correct you there.
He just looks so much like Ron Perlman in this movie. Anyway, there's this weird way in which sort of Mario as like a structure for this movie is like more of a metaphor than anything else. If the new movie takes Mario at face value and says, okay, we just need to find a way, to introduce this character from the basis of his origin story in the real world, we need to put him into the fantastical world of the Mushroom Kingdom. Once we're there, we're just going to show it straight up, right? It's the Mushroom Kingdom that you represent or that you recognize from the games, kind of one-to-one with some world building, fleshing out the more logistical aspects that you don't necessarily get from like, stage 1-1. But this one, it's kind of like it's this weird, like steampunk dystopian movie in Mario drag. Like there are excuses to arrive at like the crucial Mario pit stops, but the Mario label seems like not so much of an afterthought, but it's like equipping a different skin in a video game. It's just a very strange veneer around this movie that at its core doesn't really seem to have a lot to do with Mario.
It's almost resentful that it's like still about Super Mario Brothers, that it still has to get them in green and red. What, about an hour and 15 minutes in, Brian? Like that, all of its elements. It's almost just kind of like, oh well, that's not even cool. Like these kids need to see something cool.
And they lean into as well this like really specific aesthetic that to me was never like a huge part of the Mario games, which is like dinosaurs. So it's like technically Yoshi is a dinosaur, but they also make it so that the Goombas and that King Koopa, who I don't think they ever refer to him specifically as Bowser in this movie, do they? They just call him King Koopa. The Goombas and King Koopa and Yoshi and all of these denizens in this upside down world, they are all kind of like these evolved dinosaurs, and the plan that King Koopa has like revolves around this like de-evolution ray. So this question of the prehistoric comes up a lot. The mushroom, as Max mentioned, is kind of like this weird, like almost like Lovecraftian fungal entity that is just, it's not so much these little toadstools, it's this like slimy web of mucus that is kind of like this all-knowing, weird kind of like savior it's so strange. It's so like bizarre. Straight
out of the pink ooze of like Ghostbusters 2. Kind of like under the city of New York.
I feel like you can kind of feel them. So it was the very first video game movie, and it was marketed as such. And I think there is a little bit of the fear. They're like, we have this property that we can't make into a live action movie. so how do we take these things and make them live action? And they found really, really weird answers to that question, but you can kind of sense them asking that question or trying to come up with that. And it kind of reminds me of tonally, it reminds me of the first Ninja Turtles movie, where it's in that sort of gritty New York. It is a little more dystopian than that. But I feel like you can kind of sense the filmmakers thinking like, okay, we took like, that was a very successful movie. We're going to like take a little bit of like sort of the tone from that for a little bit, make it a little more Max Headroomy, make it a little more steampunky, and try to figure out how do we get these like mushrooms and turtles like that you're stomping on in a video game, how do you make them into a villain in a live action movie? And again, their answers are weird, but you can, like I said, I feel like you can feel them asking the question.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the Ninja Turtles movie as an example, because I was racking my brain trying to think of an example to fit this trend that this movie feels like very exemplary of to me, which is like one which I don't think has fully gone away, but we've started, I think, maybe aesthetically to stop tethering ourselves so heavily to it, is this idea of like, okay, we're representing a video game, we're representing something that has an inherent kind of agreed upon suspension of reality when you plop into it, right? And adapting it for movie audiences, it always has to come initially from the world of the real, right? You can't just be like, all right, we're in the Mushroom Kingdom, Mario wakes up one day, goes to see the princess, right? It has to be, you know, Mario and Luigi Mario are two no, they're not even brothers, they're like cousins in the movie. I don't think they're literally brothers.
They're brothers, yeah.
They are.
They're brothers. They're definitely brothers in the animated.
In the animated one, yeah, but I feel like I remember in the 90s version, there was like some question as to if they were actually even related.
No, because he was like, there's that whole scene where Luigi's like, yeah, John Leguizamo was like, oh, he raised me, and
I think it's more just that we're seeing Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo side by side. But they made very clear that they are the Mario brothers, and they also like took that very literally. They're just like, the Super Mario Brothers. That must mean that it's also their last name. So there's an easy joke for us.
Right.
Well, but and so I mean that goes to the point that I'm trying to make, which is that there's always like this impulse to explain it to an audience who you presume knows absolutely nothing about the property, and specifically in a way that always starts from like our real world, right? Like this movie starts in Brooklyn, as does the new movie too, which I think is so interesting, is that in this movie we have, and I think you see the same thing in the Ninja Turtles movie, there is more of like an aesthetic reckoning of it's like, what would this look like if it was like even remotely plausible? And to that we turn to like science fiction tropes, right? We have this de-evolution gun. We try to explain like what specifically the Koopas are. There is this question of like, okay, we know these things from the games, but like, what are they really? There is this strange kind of like inquisitive, like investigation as to like, okay, we have these little sprites, but like, how could those possibly plausibly exist in our world? And I feel like, you know, taking like the recent Sonic movies as a counterexample, there's a little bit more comfort in just accepting the inherent fantasy, but we always have the same thing where it has to integrate with like the real world. We can't just have like a Sonic movie set in the Green Hill Zone. We can't just have a Mario movie where it's, you know, Mushroom Kingdom from the jump. Even in the new movie, we have to have Mario and Luigi starting off in, you know, animated cartoon Brooklyn, but one that ostensibly obeys all of our, you know, rules of physics and normality. And yeah, I mean, like I said before, one of the strangest things that you see in the new Mario movie, and which to me felt very dated, was this like constant paranoid need to point out that the way that things happen in a video game is not how things happen in real life. So yeah, when Mario encounters floating blocks and he's like, you guys do see this, right? That's crazy. Or, you know, he gets a power up and Peach has to explain a power up and he goes, whoa, I just doubled in size. That's impossible. How did that happen? And it's like, just so strange to me that we have to keep, you know, like obsessing over this is not real, you know, and waving that in the viewer's face. It's just so strange. And I do think the 90s movie commits a little bit more to the aesthetic of like, how can we make this, I guess for lack of a better word, realistic, right?
Well, it is one of the things whenever now revisiting it recently for the second time, being like all right, well, these are all sets. At least they took their money from the Nintendo company and from the studio and was like, we're going to make some big sets and we're going to do some real puppets. And again, this is the same year as Jurassic Park. So that same year finds out that perfect pitch of scariness and darkness and thriller and getting kids involved and putting, kids in danger across the other side of the multiplex. And now, figured out how to make billions off of that, and toys and video games and all of my favorite video games from the 90s soon after that. Whereas this, does the 93 Super Mario Brothers seems to be a product of committee, a product of a studio that didn't quite know, or at least fully trust, this weird Max Headroom future, that they reshot the beginning and to have that animated, very cheaply animated beginning with like the dinosaurs eating each other before they get hit by a meteorite. You get this ending that builds in the sequel right away. Like that's always just way so hopeful for like flops like this. You have something that doesn't quite all fit together because I don't think anybody agreed on all of that. Or it seems to be a product that people got half-hearted about or lost their stomach for. That they really put all those elements and were just like, no, I liked the Max Headroom show. No, that could really work. Yeah, that would make sense. We can't just have it be the video game. It'd only be a 30-minute movie.
Yeah.
Sure, let's get Dennis Hopper, doing this and putting a lot of sexual aggression into a children's movie.
It feels like one of those movies that was greenlit like by the head of whatever, I guess it was Hollywood Studios, and then like shortly after, like middle of production, that guy was fired, and then like a new president was brought in, and I had to be like, oh, this is the movie we have now. Because Max and I just watched it. There's so, especially in the early, like probably like first like half hour, there's so much like ADR where there's just scenes of them running, and like the dialogue is like, we have to go this way, we have to go that way, and they kind of fight over it. And then the next scene that you have of them, there's literally one where it's all ADR and Mario is encouraging Luigi to go left, and then he goes left, and then the next scene is them having gone left, and then Mario's like, we went the wrong way, and just a sort of this chaotic sort of like putting things together that never were meant to be a scene. Like it just feels so chopped up. Did you guys read, there was a piece in Variety about, there was a scene, and actually this almost could have explained the movie but also weirdly make it kind of worse. So there was a deleted scene where at the end, like executives come in, like these video game people, and they're like, we heard about your story and we want to make it a video game. And so that was the explanation for why not everything was the same. Which I think is just kind of wild. And I don't know if I almost prefer the just sort of like taking it at face value.
Like Mario is like the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and there's, Max, your point earlier about how this came out, right next to Jurassic Park made me consider that, the emphasis on dinos is also kind of this like very exploitable cultural trend from like the 90s, right? Dinos big.
Land Before Time was already racking up, millions, and home direct to video. I think 93 also had Carnosaur too. So
it also had We're Back, a dinosaur story.
Oh God, We're Back. Oh hell yeah! So see, these are all movies of my childhood too, and I was a huge dino kid. And so
I actually think that the Yoshi in this movie, in a better movie, like I think the Yoshi, like, I mean, it's not Yoshi from the video games, but as a puppet on its own in a movie, like it's pretty good. I thought its face is very expressive, and all of the shrunken head like lizard Goomba people, is that what they're called?
Yes.
They're weirdly ugly, but they're also like their facial expressions are like weirdly adorable and kind of funny.
It's very expressive. I like the old fashioned, this edge before CGI taking over everything else. That is a lot of things that's still charming with this movie. What becomes less charming, and why every time that I think I want to rewatch this and like think that it's going to be a great experience, I'm going to build a cult around it, You get to the end and you're like, oh no, I mostly more just have a headache.
Yeah,
After
it's
a
just
certain
not
point.
like there's not enough Fiona Shaw, frankly, for there to
Well,
be a cult. Or
thankfully,
enough, or
what
even enough. Like I could take more like Dennis Hopper just being the villain and chewing scenery. Like those two together, more of them would have been a lot more fun.
thankfully what this movie does seem to get right is that it is as queer as it wants to be. We have this whole like club sequence of people slam dancing. We have, Big Bertha, who's coded either as a lesbian character or I hear that there's actually quite a bit of internet fanfic between Bob Hoskins and Big Bertha. So Matt, you're not alone keeping onto that card. But like, Audrey and Seymour in Little Shop of Horrors, apparently very popular with tea for tea couples. That I can kind of see some of the queerness inherent in there. And then you've got Fiona Shaw, you've got definitely a hammy Dennis Hopper. Like this one is camp, I think, through and through. It's just in ways that still don't interact very smoothly with the rest of this clinging, clattering, bright, noisy machine they ended up making. And everything that we've been discussing so far, and guessing about like, is it the studio fighting with the directors and everything else, apparently is true. Apparently, like we are getting more and more stories now. And I think it was John Leguizamo's autobiography not too long ago that was talking about him and Bob Hoskins just hating the experience and them going off and getting drunk most nights and filming most things hungover. And that like these directors were really just in over their head and really went to the bat for this darker version of the movie that none of it really made it up there. And, again, as Brian said, these very strange, in the beginning, long ADR scenes that's very clearly like a script being rewritten on the run. So it's queerness, I think, is still the best thing about it in a way that can still be revisited and enjoyed, I think, by people now.
And there is allegedly a director's cut that is floating around somewhere on archive.org that is said to be actually a much superior version. Maybe it fixes those problems. I don't know. But that issue, that question of resentment coming from, Hoskins and Leguizamo is something that if you've ever seen, there's this one interview where Bob Hoskins, who I didn't realize was a British actor until I saw this interview. I seriously did not. But he's talking about his experience with the Mario Brothers movie. And apparently he did not know what Mario was before, taking the job. And his kid was so excited. He was like, look, this is who you're going to be playing. And he showed him, a video of Mario jumping up and down or something. And Bob Hoskins looks to the interviewer and says, I used to play King Lear. Like,
he took it personally.
Moment, yeah.
He really seemed to take it personally.
I think he looks the part. Like it's great casting in terms of like, yeah, and not only looking the part, but also he's got like the cred of Roger Rabbit. I certainly knew him from that, and I remember being excited that Eddie was going to be Mario, and like I thought that was perfect. Matt, you asked earlier. I saw this on VHS in 1993. And I think I remember my memory of it was that I liked it, but I think that I liked the promise of the sequel. I think I was like so hyped at the end that I had forgotten that I had kind of forgot what I just watched. I was like, oh yeah, there's going to be another one, because it was like I was 12 and I wanted another Mario movie. But yeah, watching it now, it's
I had like kind of a weird experience of and I think it goes back to this notion that was raised earlier about like, was this a fever dream? Nobody seems to really remember it very well until they see it again. And it was just completely incongruous with its source material. And I remember being, a dino obsessed kid who was also really big into Mario and, got this off of the shelf at Blockbuster just from, the promise of a Mario movie alone. And I remember really liking it, but in the other direction, really liking it because it was about dinosaurs and having this weird kind of like mixed reaction of, even at whatever age in elementary school when I watched this, knowing that it wasn't really a good movie, or at least knowing that it didn't scratch the itch that I wanted it to. It wasn't really about Mario, but it was cool that Mario and dinosaurs were, it was almost like a crossover. It was a strange IP extension that I really dug, but also at the same time felt this really unsatisfied lack of Mario.
Yeah. I think the two movies though they're interesting sort of contrasts and adaptation, where in one case you have a movie that's running from its source material in a certain way, and then you have this other one that is embracing it so wholeheartedly. Like honestly, I feel like the animated movie looks like the Mario game. What is it? Mario 3D World that I have on my Switch, like looks exactly the same. Like it's such a no-brainer to make a CGI Mario Brothers movie and make it look exactly like the game. And I feel like it's a movie for like people 10 and under. It boggles my mind that so many adults are embracing it. I can see it for it's a kid's movie, like through and through. But the sort of discourse around it has become something else. But yeah, like I said, it embraces it.
Were written for me specifically, though. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, but it took Nintendo a very long time. I mean, wasn't it just Detective Pikachu just a couple of years ago? Was the first film since this '93 Super Mario Brothers that they actually produced? I think
that because that did well, they moved forward with this with Mario Brothers. I feel like, if my memory serves, I could be wrong about that, but probably because they were burned by this movie, I do remember. It must not have been Nintendo, but I mean, obviously there were other video game movies. I remember a Double Dragon movie, and of course Mortal Kombat and
Street Fighter.
Oh yeah,
Street Fighter. Street Fighter. That would have been a fun pairing with this one.
this definitely kicked off the live video game craze, but also contributed. I mean, or at least set the goal lines pretty quickly, being kind of like, these aren't going to be good. These are a cash grab. They're going to be campy. Like I remember being in the theater watching Mortal Kombat and loving it, but it's a mess. It's got a lot of camp. At least they wear all the right costumes. They kind of know who's coming to see the movies at this point. They start to realize, oh, these could be brain dead, but they don't have to be overly complicated. So, as we get to those, or even as we get into like the Resident Evil movies or the Silent Hill movies, they don't really stray still too far from what's at the heart of the games. Neither does Double Dragon, even by giving it, a little bit of a Hollywood whitewash. Mortal Kombat is exactly the game. They just stick around talking until there's a fight. So there does seem to be this effect that 93 Super Mario Brothers set the template to be like, let's just try to keep it simple moving forward. We can spend our money trying to make this look cool in ways that capture 11-year-olds' attentions, but we do not need to overthink and think that we need to split them into another dimension, and that King Koopa is this Donald Trump-like character with with an aversion of germs, and is holed out in the bombed out Twin Towers, which is a very disturbing. Still, I saw it twice in this last year of when they're in the real world and like the dinosaur world is overtaking moment by moment, and then they have like that dissolve of the Twin Towers, and it's just kind of like, oh no. They just can't leave those alone throughout the 90s up until anyway. But
it's so like it just looks so terrible though that I didn't feel any sense of like, I don't know. I just like, that looks like shit. Like it just, whatever they're doing, it just looks like shit.
I just mean that was where it was weird for me, is that it's like very comical and it's just very kind of like disturbing in equal measures. But maybe that's the best tagline for 93 Super Mario Brothers that you can get.
Well, it looks like shit.
Disturbing and comical in equal measure. Looks like shit.
No, I like the DVD quote. It's a blast.
Ain't that the damn truth?
But no, I remember this movie. I remember I don't know what movie we saw, but I remember seeing a movie with my family before Mario Brothers came out. But I remember seeing the Super Mario Brothers poster and being like, oh my God. Like my brothers and I were so excited for that. It was the two of them in the M, like with the thumbs up and like the plumber thing. But yeah, I love the we mentioned it earlier, but how Mario was always this plumber from Brooklyn. And it's interesting to me that that's been something that they've held on to for so long, because I always wasn't it just sort of like supposed to be just some dumb American, like, and they were like, they just kind of, because it's a Japanese game, right? Like, I don't know, at what point did he
Mario
become an
was
Italian
always
plumber?
Yeah, I think Mario was always a New Yorker, or at least I don't know. I don't know how baked into his lore that is.
Yeah, it
But
just always seemed like it's interesting because he that originated in Japan, and I mean, I guess he's a plumber because you have him going up and through those pipes and everything, and why not? But also speaking of, just it was such a weirdly sort of. There were so many set pieces in the '93 movie of like, I'm a plumber and I'm here to help, and
they took the plumbing very seriously.
Well, they do it in the
major
new movie too.
Plumbing crisis. Oh, do they?
In the animated movie, his whole thing, he gets down, like, something's happening in Brooklyn and he has to go and save these pipes that are overflowing, and that's how he ends up getting sucked in. It's pretty close. So how, I mean, Daisy, there's no princess there. He doesn't meet the princess until later, but yeah, he goes to like help New York. There's no like corporate, I guess there even is. There's a competing plumbing company.
Okay, so
in the
I
animated
guess you
movie,
could charitably call that a homage then.
I suppose, yeah. Yeah. But I did like the to go back to the cartoon. I liked the Mario Kart. I liked that they threw in Mario Kart, and there was like sort of a Super Smash Brothers scene in there too. But it's like the highlight of the movie is like, hey, do you remember these things from these games that you've played?
did you also like gasp when they made Cranky Kong sound like Larry David?
I didn't make that connection. No.
Oh, okay. I mean, they made him just sound like an old Jewish man, I guess, which I first thought of Curb, but I don't remember. It was actually somebody pretty high profile who voiced him. It wasn't Larry David, but it was oh god. No, it was Fred Armisen. It was Fred Armisen.
Doing a Larry David impression.
He was kind of doing like what SNL character would it be closest to? Or actually, it sounded like a Portlandia character. It was pretty funny. I was a pretty big fan of most of the voice cast of the new movie, with the exception of Chris Pratt. And honestly, I didn't even think Charlie Day was a good Luigi, who is barely in the movie. They really only bring him out so he can have his weird like edging scene with Bowser that the internet
okay, yeah. So this is apparently an internet thing. Is that Bowser and Luigi are boyfriends?
Yeah. I don't know.
Man, I missed that. I must have missed that. This is news to me. I deleted Twitter, so I don't know.
No, I follow a couple of queer cartoonists on Patreon, and like two of them did Luigi and Bowser. Like unlock for fan stuff, and it's like, no, that's apparently like a big Reddit thing. This is that. I don't know. You always have some of the weirdest ships, I suppose, as properties go on and on and on, but that one just seems particularly really funny to me.
Yeah. I will say though that the weekend that this opened was I very briefly was an assistant manager at a movie theater in the suburbs, and it was terrible and I did not like it, but I don't work there anymore. And opening weekend of Mario Brothers movie, there were a lot of cosplaying, a lot of couples and things. And my favorite was these two. There was a boy and a girl, or at least likely currently identified as boy and girl, but they were both in dresses and both dressed like Princess Peach, and I thought it was the sweetest, cutest thing. So yeah, if it's inspiring little boys to want to wear a dress, then great.
So Super Mario Brothers stays woke. Well,
Thank you.
the 93 version, I think, is very woke. I mean, you basically have based off of bringing in climate change. They want to invade our dimension because they're out of resources. You've got very clearly coded characters over and over. And I know we started talking about this, Brian, but like, I think the main reason still to watch the 93 version today is Fiona Shaw. She knows what she's doing in this movie. She's got the costumes that fit. She gets
Yeah,
some of those big scenes. She gets the nightclub fight, and she
she
gets to be
understood the assignment.
and she gets to be blasted upon the wall in a fossil, and make a big impression, quote unquote.
Yeah. Also, John Leguizamo wears a rainbow belt, and I don't think that that's an accident. I think this is 2 years after he made Poison with Todd Haynes. I think he knows what a gay pride flag looks like, and I don't think that he put that on ignorant of what it looked like.
He's walking around the desert,
Yeah.
shirtless. He's like, and it's Twinkie John Leguizamo. He's so cute.
Yeah.
It's like a couple of years right before Tu Wong Fu. So,
Oh, it's like, I guess that's like 5 or 6 years, huh? That's crazy how that feels
just
like
3 years.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was like 98, right?
96.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
wild.
So, I mean, like, there's people in this that are about to be in much bigger movies. Obviously, Samantha Mathis is getting her handle around remembering her lines. I mean, Bob Hoskins had been in, I guess, he'd probably been like, I'm fucking sick of children's movies because he had just done Hook. He'd just done Roger Rabbit. Those were very technically difficult movies. And then, with all the stories coming out of this one, that like this set was very chaotic and everything else, I think it makes sense that you're not having any of these actors revisit being in kids' movies for quite a while.
Yeah.
I don't think, Dennis Hopper, that's probably the only time you're getting him close to anything kid-oriented.
No, but he did a lot of villains, so.
Yeah, but I mean, like, Speed's coming out next year, and
Yeah.
like that's going to be a much better use of everybody's time and talents. And I guess just realizing that, the 90s were also realizing that they could just sell whatever movie to kids. They can be is violent or whatever.
Yeah.
And my permissive parents are like, yeah, let's go see Speed.
Yeah. I kind of appreciate, though, how it's very clearly marketed towards kids, and I kind of appreciate how dark they went with it. Because, like I said, like it's a study in contrast of adaptation. The 2023 animated movie doesn't do that at all. Like I said, it's brightly colored. It looks like a video game. It looks like Super Mario 3D World.
But Mario has a panic attack, so it's for adults. I'm so tired of it.
Didn't that just happen in Puss in Boots too?
I know. Well, I think the reason people are jumping on that is because it's becoming a little bit of a meme about the quote unquote realistic portrayal of a panic attack in children's movie. Which
I don't even remember the panic attack.
No, he doesn't. It's literally just when Bowser's like attacking and he's like hiding behind the counter in a restaurant and he's like scared. I don't know. I think Puss in Boots actually did feel like they were like, okay, that's he's having a panic attack. It did feel, not to bite the phrase, but a realistic portrayal of a panic attack. This one was just the all is lost moment in the movie. Mario's having his little like moment of insecurity and he's not sure if he's going to be able to beat Bowser. And then, spoiler, with the power of friendship, he does.
Yeah. My other big qualm with the movie is why is the star suddenly this unattainable like object of which there's only one? Because there's like a star, an invincibility star in every level in Mario.
That's actually, I think the star has undergone like the most like change in the Mario mythos as far as like items go, because at first it was just a power up that made you invincible, and it was like you said, it's just something that kind of pops out of blocks every now and then. But then I think with Mario
64, yeah, to collect the whole shitload.
Yeah, well,
but really?
From then on, it was also kind of like the the end of the level, right? It's what you collect to finish the level, which is like a microcosm of the story, right? You collect a shitload of them, but it is kind of like the final thing. It is the goal for the level. So I kind of understand that.
Oh, I guess I missed that generation of games then.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that also the new one on the Switch was the star was the reward at the end of every level too?
Is that Odyssey?
Yeah.
Odyssey was Moons.
Oh, it was Moons. That's right.
Yeah, but I mean, they continue
to Moons and Clovers too.
There's variations of it because, like in Mario Sunshine, it was shine sprites, which are basically just stars in the shape of a sun. I think I don't remember what they use for Galaxy. I think it's stars. What is it? Oh God, I don't remember. But yeah,
So
I mean,
it's our all-purpose MacGuffin.
yeah, exactly. And I think it went from being a power up to a MacGuffin, and this movie does kind of both, in that it is the end all be all MacGuffin to like win the game, but it is also a power up that bestows powers upon them. Also, I'm not entirely sure if this was intentional, or if I'm just looking, my pattern seeking brain is just looking for things that remind me of anime, but I am certain that the coordinated Mario Luigi attack at the very end, where they kind of like both put the boot to Bowser and like a synchronized like diving thing, that to me was Evangelion. That was the episode of Evangelion where Asuka and Shinji have to coordinate their attacks to fight the angel. Anyway, it looked very similar. I don't know if that was intentional. Maybe.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I feel like with how popular anime is getting within a theatrical sense, but also so many more people screening it at home, I feel like animators are probably just learning to take a lot more from each other or be inspired from that.
Yeah, and I mean, like most recently, we saw Jordan Peele putting the Akira bike slide at the end of Nope. So, but although that one's been done a bunch before.
Anything that's been directed by the Wachowskis over nearly 3 decades at this point too.
Yeah. I don't know anime well at all, and honestly, Matthew, I your whole sentence, I was like, I don't know what you just said.
Well, so
I could have just been making something up too. That would be fun.
Instead of
I wouldn't know the difference.
Comparatively, 93 Super Mario Brothers is not being influenced by other animation. It seems it's being influenced by, Matt, you said it off the front. Like, these are two people who love Blade Runner. These are two people who love a lot of other apocalyptic sci-fi. But I think it's also clearly people who were still living in the post-Batman, or at least the Tim Burton Batman era here. And so part of where I think a lot of people started losing their nerve in 93 was 92 or 91, but Batman Returns had just come out and traumatized a whole bunch of McDonald's kids 6-year-old ages. Like, I was part of around that age though too, is that a lot of the darkness, live action oriented towards kids. Brian mentioned Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 was a huge hit. The original Burton, huge hit. Even though that Batman Returns crossed a line, I think, for a lot of parents or scared off toy manufacturers, it still made a lot of money. So I still think that you're heading into Super Mario Brothers. Oh, it's a video game, but they're still probably thinking about more like, oh, we just successfully adapted superheroes after it took us years and years and years and years. We'll try to do the Batman model. We'll try to do the Superman model. And then we'll try to make it a little bit more kid friendly. And instead, all of that weight just collapses down, on top of each other because they forgot to actually put together any type of propulsive story, which is where Jurassic Park is eating its lunch next door in the multiplex. But I think that they ultimately were trying to cobble together parts and things that they thought still interest kids, which was this darker atmosphere and apparently morally ambivalent characters and such. And that might make sense for Mario too. Whereas I think they completely misjudged video game audiences at this time. That changed as the stand-up games and PlayStation games and everything else, and the horror video game craze, I think, changed all of that. But then that created some of the worst movies of the early 2000s. That might be for a different episode if we want to talk about some from the Resident
Uwe Ball movies.
Yeah, the Uwe Bell. I mean, I love quite a bit of the Resident Evil movies, but none of them are exactly good. And the type of movies that they were influencing too. What was it Mila Jovovich in Ultraviolet, or the Aeon Flux adaptation? I feel there's this video games and anime, as Matt said, have had this influence that made their way into the later 90s and the early 2000s. We just weren't there yet for 1993, where they might have benefited more from it, and instead ran away from its video gameness and Japaneseness and said, we just need to make this loud and police cars crashing and take a different American direction rather than trust what, people were really responding to at the time.
Well, and that's what's so weird about the new Mario movie to me. I think you put it well in that it is kind of embarrassed of its video game roots. I mean, it's I don't think it's consciously that. I mean, it is so, as you said, Brian, it is like so just completely packed with all these references, and the whole point of the movie is basically just a conveyor belt for these references and homages, and you could call it a love letter to the games, but there is this like continued self-conscious presentation of, oh, isn't it weird that these things are in video games? Isn't it weird that this is all happening right now? It just seems very, maybe the new Mario movie isn't the best example of this, but I thought it had like this weird fragment of that DNA in it, that there's still kind of like this very American idea that movies and video games have to be completely separate in terms of their like narrative layout, right? Like we can't go into a movie based on a video game with the same level of suspension of disbelief. We kind of have to start from the ground up to explain why these things are happening. And I'm trying to think of an example of a video game movie that didn't do that.
Well, it's less of, I mean, like, I think you're looking at some of that on television now, like The Last of Us. And I feel like, what was successful for The Last of Us was that it tried to be the video game, and that it was just like, oh, so much has changed for video games. Why don't we just give people what they want here, and a lot of the same scenes and a lot of the same things, and then we can hang all the rest of these stories off of it. So I think some of it's just changing with the type of video games that are popular now, though, too. That wasn't, in '93, you didn't have things that had much story or any cutscenes,
Well, so I think a lot of it, like, I mean, it's interesting because like video games have sort of, I feel like you and I, Max, are of a generation that kind of grew up with video games. And in 1993, you're entering a place where I feel like in 93, it was still mostly played. I was 13 in 93. So I feel like it was mostly played by people under 20. And so as the time goes on and people are growing up with it, you have people that are just growing up with video games, and alongside of it, technology is advancing, and so video games can get bigger and more complex, and the people that have been playing it since they were 8 or 9 years old and are now 28 or 29 years old have been playing video games their entire lives, and they've been watching this evolution. Whereas in 1993, it was mostly people probably under 20. It was relying a lot on parents taking their children to a movie. Whereas now, I mean, like I said, I was 13 in 93. I've been playing Super Mario Brothers since I was 10. So 32 years. So you have an entire generation sort of, I don't want to say raised by video games, but for lack of a better expression. And I think all of those things kind of tie into it, and they tie into, and then as the technology advances, the story can get more elaborate, and the story can grow deeper. And like I said, the audiences the people that have been playing it have been growing up alongside video games themselves.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually seen any of the guys specifically like video game adaptation movies, but Paul W.S. Anderson does seem to get that video game sensibility a lot. So like the Resident Evil movies, I haven't seen them, but I did just watch. He did the first AVP, right? He did
I think so, yeah.
Predator, and I watched that, and I was like, "This is so." I mean, it's not based off of a video game, but it's got the exact same kind of like marriage of set piece and plot that a video game does. I mean, at one point, one of the characters like loots a Xeno's corpse for its head, and she starts using it as a shield. Like it's brilliant.
I think you're right. I feel like by the time we got to Paul W.S. Anderson, who realized his lot in life was to be like, oh, the games that I get stoned to and play are the things that I should put on screen. And the Resident Evil movies got like better as they went along, or at least more of just like, okay, these are for a certain amount of fans. We don't have any self-consciousness about why we're doing this or who this appeals to. It is just, we've kind of talked around it a bit. It's weird when a video game movie feels self-conscious. It is much better when they have the confidence to be like, we know what we're giving and we know what our audience wants. So whether it's good or not, and again, out of all the video game movies, are there any that are actually like 3.5 star ready or any of that type of good video games? I guess Last of Us on TV might be the closest that you can get. But for the most part, most video game movies are mostly content or have to be content with being kind of not not that good because they're two very different mediums, but we feel this need to keep making movies out of video games.
I'm like kind of interested as like a parallel question to this, like the trend of video game movies that get made that are clearly not intended to leave the target audience of like the fans of that video game, like those Final Fantasy movies that get made every now and then that are, all animated, but very glossy, like those sorts of things. And I think you kind of see a similar trend with like anime movies, like the various like One Piece movies that get made, or like the Dragon Ball movies, where they don't waste a lot of time trying to, catch you up to speed. They do include a certain amount of like context setting at the beginning, because even within the fandom, not everybody's gonna come in with the same like set of understanding of the property, but it's like a completely different genre. And I wonder, that's the weird thing with Mario to me still, is that it strikes me as such a ubiquitous brand that it seems weird to have a self-conscious Mario movie at all. I mean, I guess from a marketing perspective, you can't expect everybody to go in, knowing everything, or even knowing the bare minimum about, what Mario is, but you have to expect at this point that it's kind of just like this little tidbit of cultural knowledge that is just part of our zeitgeist for long enough that it doesn't need
do you have to explain Godzilla in a new movie at this point anymore?
Right?
I feel, or King Kong. I feel like that's the ubiquity of Mario at this point.
Well, and I think at this point also there is just some kind of like pleasure that comes with the origin story. Like we see so many of them, and it's not so much like a practical thing as it is an aesthetic thing. Like there is some kind of pleasure to be derived from seeing where the Mario Brothers came from, even though it kind of requires this clunky opening that is, simultaneously like a little bit cute and a little bit perfunctory, right? Like
that was weird to me. I was like, I don't know how to say this other than just say it, but I know it's a sentence that wouldn't make sense if you're talking about human beings. But like, when did Mario get parents? Right? Like, obviously, everybody has parents, but at this, like, have they ever been mentioned in any of the games? Has there ever been any other siblings?
I want to know how
Where did those people come from? Yeah, and like, how old are they?
2023 Mario is, yeah.
Because he owns his own business, but he shares a bedroom with his brother in his parents' house. I don't get it either.
At least with Bob Hoskins, you get a pretty firm sense of how old Mario is.
Yeah, and that Mario fucks.
That Mario oh my god. Yeah.
That Mario fucks at least two women in that movie. Maybe not in the movie, like obviously in the context of the movie, but like he's got it.
We haven't seen the director's
right. Well, he has a girlfriend at the beginning of the movie, and he's totally hot for Bertha. So and Luigi too. Luigi's got it. Luigi also had a date, and he's hot for Princess. These Mario brothers fuck.
Yeah. No. The kids movie Mario Brothers do not. I think very pointedly they do not fuck.
I remember reading an article. There was one of the more recent video Mario games that came out featured a water level. And in the water level, he was in trunks and he had nipples. And I remember reading an article about like Mario has nipples, which is another one of those things where it's like, sure, if he's a human man, he has nipples, but also I don't want to see them.
Well, but that's the thing, is that Mario has never even really registered as human to me. Like he's just this weird little squat freak. Like in the Bob Hoskins movie, yes, he is human. He's
he's human in 2023 as well, because that's why Peach is happy to see him.
That's right. They make a big deal out of the fact that they share the same species. And even, I mean, it is very odd seeing his family too, because they make an effort to make them kind of look like the Mario brothers. So you can see like kind of the genetic heritage there, but they also just, they look so much more like actual humans, even in this like highly cartoony world of allegedly real New York. They look so much more like actual humans than the Mario brothers do. It in juxtaposition with Mario and Luigi like sitting there at the dinner table, it's just like, what the fuck are these things? These are not people.
Yeah, and it's one of those, and this is a complaint that I have. Like I've had this sort of issue with previous like CGI movies where you have like in this one, the water that they're in looks like real water, but then they're like floating around, and obviously it's this cartoony sort of Mario face. It's not quite a uncanny valley, but it's pretty close. We're at over an hour, and I know Matthew has plans. Does anybody have anything more they wanted to say about either of these films?
I'm worried that my say something gay about both of these movies is going to be longer than usual, but I also don't think it really extends to anything more than a list of moments that I was like holding my mouth behind my hands, and so my tongue can like roll out like in a Looney Tunes movie. Yeah, I don't know. I've already
it's been established that Bob Hoskins was important to you.
Very, yeah. So I've already said my piece on Bob Hoskins. I reiterate that although Mario and Luigi don't look like humans and so therefore have like the same sex appeal as like a Cupid doll to me, Spike, the callback character who I don't remember where he first shows up, but it's like in one of the early Mario games. He's like, in this movie, he's Mario's tormentor, and he's kind of depicted as this burly like douchebag construction bro. Hot, very hot. Donkey Kong, they make a great show out of him flexing his pecs a lot, also hot. Bowser, always loved Bowser. He's got a lot of personality in this movie. I think, they really had to put a fine point on the fact that he was trying to ritually sacrifice all of the characters to please Princess Peach, because they knew that if they didn't make him do something explicitly evil, everybody would just want him to be with Princess Peach, because he has more character than Mario does. He has this funny little power ballad that he sings with his second in command, who's in drag at the time. It's great. Bowser has always been more of a sympathetic character than I think Nintendo needs him to be for the purposes of his villainhood, but then they've also kind of recast him as this anti-hero or fair weather friend, and the Bowser, Mario and Luigi, Bowser's inside story. There's stuff that requires you to collaborate with him, and even in later games, the whole thing of him kidnapping the princess kind of just becomes this perfunctory ritual that he does, and nobody even really knows why. He's I might as well just do it again. So I like that Bowser is still, I saw somebody say that it was cool that they didn't try to give him a redemption, that he was just a straight up villain. But I do think, while that is true for the purposes of the movie, they gave him a lot of heart. I love Bowser. Peach doesn't know your heart like I do, Bowser.
I can see him being Team Mario in the sequel.
Please, they have to golf together at some point.
Well, I think that the sequel should be his kids trying to get him. I want to see those. I want to see the ships. From Mario Brothers 3.
Yeah, just go full Super Mario Brothers 3.
Please.
Yes.
Or go super weird and go full Super Mario Brothers 2 and make everybody look completely different.
Well, and I'm worried that the kids aren't going to show up because they used up one of their names as a throwaway gag. When he's playing the piano, it says Ludwig von Bowser on it, and it's Ludwig is one of his kids. That's
I missed that.
It's cute. Then there's a million things like that in the movie where it is really enjoyable, and they're not even they're not even all that hidden. It's very much they pull up at one point, they're looking at a map of all of the kingdoms, and it's just the map of New Super Mario Brothers 2, I think, but it's a hologram or something. It's all very clearly tailored to make you go oh, I know that, which is cute. I do not think it's a particularly good movie.
Yeah, I said, I just wish it had something more to offer than, hey, you remember this?
Yeah. Oh, and Mario's dad is also hot. They put great detailing into his hairy forearms.
This really worked for you, Matt.
I was pretty entertained.
Play this for your date so he knows
Yeah, that'll be kind of the litmus test.
Yeah. Max, do you have a say something gay?
Yeah, well, we were already talking about shirtless John Leguizamo wearing his pride belt, walking around the desert. So I was thinking, it's Iggy and Spike. So apparently, we even get an Iggy and Spike in the '93 version, and they're the first two brothers. They're there's the Hammer brothers. Anyway, those are the two cousins, I think, but they're like Koopa's cousins. Fisher Stevens and Richard Edson, they've got like all those wacky like early 90s suits and everything else. I don't know, they kind of do it for me. As I said to Brian, I was like, during this scene where they were fighting, I was like, I don't know, I'd watch the video.
I don't want to take Matthews, but at the same time, I'm gonna. No, Bob Hoskins in this movie is a total daddy and could get it. I think it is the mustache. Into it for sure.
Yeah, he's looking butcher than ever and more rough trade than ever.
Yeah, R.I.P.
Oh yeah, I guess. Well, Bob Hoskins, we're talking about you in a very respectful way.
We're fans.
We are.
I'm sure he would appreciate that.
Well,
Gentlemen,
appreciate his legacy being.
Hey, I'm sure he made a great King Lear. I didn't see it, so I'm sorry. Sorry, Bob.
Oh, who lives?
Should have sent me some tickets. Perfect. I love going out on a Hamilton reference. Thank you so much, guys, for hopping on. This was a fun episode. And thank you, Max, for having me over. I'm in Max's apartment. We just watched Super Mario Brothers. I don't know if we said that on air, but thank you. Can we find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me at Max Bever on Instagram or Max R Bever on Twitter.
And I am at Rat Jacko on Twitter and Letterboxd.
Fabulous.
Oh, that's right. I'm on Letterboxd now. I forgot. I'm sorry. At Max Bever on Letterboxd as well.
No worries. I am So Brian Rowe. That's Brian with an I, R-O-W-E on Instagram and Letterboxd. You can find the podcast at Piece of Pie Pod on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next episode. And we'll get back at you next time. Go see a movie, and probably I would recommend not seeing Super Mario Brothers, but you do you.